In the second half of 1938, the world was clenching its teeth once more, as it would seem that ever-increasing aggressive speech resides from the government of Germany and the Empire of Japan. But then, on October 31st, something terrible happened in the US. As people were going about their daily lives, a shadow fell over the area of Newark, Philadelphia, and surrounding small places. A giant howling object could be seen floating in the sky. Though first people thought it was some experiment by the Germans or the Japanese, it soon became apparent that no one in this world had the capability to produce something like this. After just looming high above the cities and towns for a few days, contact was made via black little metal objects proclaiming themselves probe droids. Through some sort of projector, the leader of the unidentified faction made himself be known as Emperor Palpatine, conqueror of worlds all throughout the galaxy. He had taken over many worlds before and enslaved its population to fight for them. His goal was to dominate over all life, and Earth was next. It was not his goal to destroy the planet, but rather conquer it and its people. America had been chosen as the first target, but others would follow soon. Of course, the people of Earth would not stand for this, and a war declaration between the people of Earth and the so-called Galactic Empire was made. Soon after, smaller flying ships ejected from the larger sprawling ones and let out troopers dressed in white armor and giant tank-like vehicles moving on 2 or sometimes even 4 mechanical legs. Often they were dropped outside the cities and suburban areas and marched in where they faced off against the US Army. For the initial assault with Earth, Palpatine had issued the deployment of 120,000 units. Philadelphia and Newark were taken in only a matter of days. Many assumed that they would The battle then shifted towards the countryside surrounding the taken cities as the Galactic Imperial forces were getting closer to Washington. Here in the open, the people of Earth were not afraid of using artillery, and it was very effective against the invading infantry and some of their lighter armor. It did not take long before America realized it would need help with this alien menace. A few factions seemed open to aid them in the process of fending Palpatine's forces off, but the Allies were the logical choice. The United Kingdom and France were amongst the first of the Allied nations to ensure that reinforcing troops were on their way towards the American shores. The Americans by then had already lost almost 10,000 men. UK's Prime Minister Chamberlain saw this as an opportunity to opt for a war industry without his own country's ground being directly under attack. Regardless, he also realized that Britain was under direct threat as the enemy's ships could arrive at other nations as well. France, on the other hand, thought outward and invested time and money in a capital ship-focused program. This was to support the sent troops to America and, in their mind, to provide artillery support from the seas against the enemies in the sky. The battle for Washington had commenced. Set up heavy defenses kept the enemy at bay, but it came at a great cost. Where Washington's center was a bit more difficult to get a hold on for Palpatine's forces, in the neighboring suburban areas, fighting happened at close range and losses were felt on both sides. Seeing the pacing of the enemy's movement come to a halt gave a big boost in morale to the armies of Earth. And they needed this badly, as within another week, almost 6,000 men lost their lives. With Palpatine's armies moving towards the north, it was likely that Canada would be the next nation to directly come into contact with them at the border. The enemy kept on taking more harbors on the east coast, which were vital for the people of Earth to hold, especially with troops already being sent over from Europe towards America. They would arrive within several days. Palpatine was pleased with how things were going. The war hadn't even lasted a whole month, and they already had a giant foothold on American territory. Plans were made for sending a new wave of troopers and even to invade other nations. Canada now also had officially joined in combat, and they were fighting to protect their borders. They chose open spots like riverbeds and fields to keep the enemies at bay. The giant and imposing spider droids were slow, making them easy targets in the wide open. And the spider droids had trouble traversing steep mountains, meaning mostly infantry were used to traverse here. But the US and Canadian soldiers were often able to win these types of contact. They would sweep in, do damage to the enemy, and then retreat again. The soldiers from Earth sometimes made jokes about the stormtroopers' shooting accuracy, and one soldier even found notes on one of the dead stormtroopers mentioning a battle they had in a previous war campaign with creatures labeled Ewoks or Awoks. They weren't sure of the pronunciation. It stated that these teddy bear-sized creatures managed to take on some of Palpatine's best units with sticks, spears, and stones. This finding boosted the Earthen soldiers' morale even more. Nevertheless, despite these wins here and there, overall, the enemy was still advancing. Help was indeed on the way from Europe, but with each passing day, Palpatine's army created an ever so increasing dominant position. Everyone just hoped that it wasn't too late already.